We got most of what we wanted at the Fleet's place, which we'd used before as a hideout. The hardest thing to find was nails that were big enough, long enough, strong enough. After a bit of scrounging and a bit of carpentry and a bit of improvisation, we left there at 1:30, running late but not too bad. And an hour and a half after that we were where we wanted to be, approaching a steep cutting on Buttercup Lane. It was thick bush up there. We'd already dived into it once when we heard a convoy coming, and just before we reached the cutting, Fee, who was leading, gave the signal to hide again. It had to be a patrol, so I crouched and scuttled into a scrub as fast as I could. Behind me, a dark shadow that was Lee dived off the embankment and landed about 2 meters away. I couldn't see the others. Chris and Homer were behind me, and Robin ahead somewhere, with Fee. Almost as soon as I was hiding, I heard the scrunch of the boots. 3 soldiers in single file walking quite casually along the road above my head. I crouched even lower, and hoped that the others were well hidden. The soldiers' footsteps seemed to be slowing, and then they stopped completely. I risked a glance and saw just the back of one of them moving slowly away from me. It was a woman, I thought, and an instant later she was out of my sight. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't imagine why they'd stopped, unless they'd seen one of us. But there were none of the urgent sounds I'd expect if they had. Desperate thoughts rushed through my head. What should I do? What could I possibly do? I lifted myself and crept forward a meter, frightened that if I went any further I might crawl straight into a trap. Then suddenly I flattened myself. A shotgun fired to my right, so close that my ears rang with the noise. I lay there, unable to breathe. I could hear several cries, then a scream, hoarse and horrible. The shotgun fired again, a little more muffled this time. I could smell its spicy, burnt smell now. I'd hoped that it was a double-barreled one and that no one else had a weapon. And with the only thought in my head, I launched myself up the bank and onto the road. The first thing I noticed was the sound of footsteps, someone running in panic down the road. I couldn't see much, just a dark shape, but it was one of the soldiers, not one of us. Then there was a crashing sound from the bushes. I spun around, wondering if this was my death, the last movement I would ever make, the last sight I would see. But it was Homer, stumbling towards me, and Chris just behind me, a little to his left, making awful retching noises. I realized as Homer reached me that he had blood all down the front of his shirt, thick and sticky. The others were now emerging from their hiding places and rushing at us. I ripped Homer's shirt open and felt around his chest and shoulders, but couldn't find any wound. "No, no," he said, pushing me away. "I'm not hurt." "What happened?" I shouted at him. I was completely bewildered. "Did you grab their guns?" He shook his head and waved his arms around. He didn't seem to be able to answer. But Chris, who was trembling but becoming suddenly and amazingly calm, answered for him. "Homer had a shotgun in his pack," he said. "Sawn-off." Fee gasped. We all looked at Homer in shock. We talked about our meagre little stock of weapons a few times and agreed that with such limited firepower we were better off with nothing. We knew if we were caught with weapons on us we were gone, 100% certain. A willy-willy of feelings stormed up inside me. Anger, confusion, disbelief. But I had to postpone them, and I did. I was still holding Homer by the tail of his shirt, but now I let him go and shouted at Chris. "What happened? What happened?" It was just the worst bad luck. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman. The men decided to take a leak, right where we were. They dropped their rifles and came down into the scrub. They were about 3 steps from us and still coming, unbuttoning their dacks. They would have walked right over the top of us. Homer had his pack beside him, and his hand inside it, holding the shotgun, I guess, and he just suddenly pulled it out and lifted it up and fired. Chris was talking fast, reconstructing it in his mind as he went, trying to recall it all, and then describing it to us as he ran the movie in his head. The guy fell backwards. The other guy gave a shout, then dived at Homer. Homer seemed to swing the gun around. He was still lying down. The guy landed half on top of him, and then there was another shot, and all this blood was coming out, and Homer got out from under him and came up here. The woman ran off down the road, but we couldn't do anything about her. It's a double-barrel shotgun, but I don't know if he's got any more shells, and there wouldn't have been time to reload anyway. She was running flat out. "Let's get off the road," Robin said. "In fact, let's get out of here." Even as she spoke, I caught a glimpse of lights in the distance, the dimmed headlights of a convoy beginning the long climb up the road towards the cutting. The thoughts were queuing up in my mind so fast they were crashing into the back of each other. The convoy was coming from the opposite direction to the way the soldier had fled. How long would it take her to get help? Would she be able to communicate with the convoy? I grabbed Chris. "Check the road. Where did they drop their guns?" "Just back here." "Grab them, and anything else. Everyone else up to the cutting. Fee, you take Homer. Put the nails out and be ready." I ran back with Chris. We picked up 2 guns, one an old .303, the other a more modern automatic weapon that I didn't recognize. With them was a small pack. I tore it open and pulled out what I'd hoped to find, a small 2-way radio. Chances were they wouldn't have any more than 1 radio on each patrol. "Where's your stuff? Yours and Homer's?" "Still in there." Chris pointed to the bush behind us. I grabbed my torch and looked at Chris. "What if they're still alive?" he asked. I paused, then shrugged, and led the way into the scrub. We only had to go a few meters, of course. In the torchlight I could see blood on the grass, then some scratched-up earth. That led me to a body, a soldier on his back, eyes open but dead. His chest looked like 2 giant hands had taken it and ripped it open. I swung the torch around and saw the other 2 packs, and the bloodied Sawn-off shotgun near them. Chris picked up the packs as I got the shotgun, trying not to shudder as my hands touched the sticky butt. I straightened up and at that moment heard the worst sound in the world, a sob and a squeal. I swung the torch around. I could see his boots about 10 meters away, sticking out from under a little acacia. I walked over there as Chris backed away. I despised him for that, but wished I could have done the same. I parted the branches of the bush and shone the torch down on the man. It was amazing he'd been able to crawl even those few yards. He was lying twisted to one side, with his right hand stretched out to the trunk of the wattle, holding it lightly. His other hand was holding his stomach. He was whimpering occasionally, but I don't think he was conscious. There was blood all around him, some of it smeared across the ground, but fresh red blood pumping out from under his stomach. It looked thick and treacly. His hand was trying to hold bits of his stomach in, but I could see all kinds of things, disgusting things, entrails and stuff. I walked over to Chris. I knew how my face must have looked to him. Cold, hard, no expression. "Which is Homer's pack?" I asked him. He gave it to me and I searched inside. There were at least a dozen shells rolling around loose. I only took one, loaded the shotgun, and went straight back to the soldier and held it to his temple. Then, Jesus help me, without thinking about it, deliberately not letting myself think, I pulled the trigger. After that, everything was a wild rush. I figured we had about 2 minutes. My ears were ringing with the noise of the shotgun. I ignored that and ignored what I'd just done. We ran like hell up the road to the cuttings. The others had put out the nails. I almost trod on one. They were 15 centimeters long, each hammered through a piece of wood which has served as a base and kept them upright. Fee was waiting for us. She was so white I thought she'd gone albino. "What was the shot?" she asked, trembling all over. "Nothing, Fee. Be brave." I touched her arm and ran up to the other 3. "Are we ready?" "Yes, but what about the one who escaped? Won't she?" "I don't think so. I found a 2-way radio. I can't believe they'd had more than 1 radio." "Hope you're right," said Robin. "She's right," said Lee grimly. In one of those strange, crazy flashes of intuition, I realized how much Lee wanted us to make this attack. If tanks had been rolling straight at us, I don't think he would have moved. He was very into honor and revenge. Homer looked calmer, but he hadn't spoken. He had a bottle in each hand. I could hear the trucks now. The leading ones were dropping a gear, so were probably close to the cutting. I grabbed my bottles, fished out the cigarette lighter. The dull headlights of the first truck were starting to show through the trees. The convoys always had their headlights covered by some stuff that kept the light down to a soft glow. I guess they were scared of air attacks. But we didn't see too many of our planes these days, so I'd say these drivers felt pretty safe. We were hoping to change that. Now the straining engines relaxed. There were several quick gear changes and the truck started to roll, gathering speed through the cutting. We had placed ourselves on a bank so that as they came out of the cutting, we'd be above them, on a curve. We reckoned they'd be travelling fast, easing across the road towards us as they entered the bend. And we were right. They sure did accelerate. They seemed to be there in an instant. The roar of the engines was suddenly coming straight at us, unobstructed by any more trees or banks. I had a good view of the first 3, all of them trucks, dark green in colour, tray tops with gates and tarps. Then everything went wild. The first truck seemed to blow both its front tires at the same moment. It was like a bomb going off. It was an almighty explosion. I couldn't believe how loud it was, nor how much smoke. Bits of rubber, strips of rubber went shredding across the road. The truck slid straight across the road at high speed, back tires screaming, and slammed against a tree. The second tire must have missed all the nails because it kept its tires intact, but in trying to miss the other vehicle, it wobbled wildly across the road as the driver fought to keep control. It finally straightened up again 50 meters past us and accelerated away. I was disgusted. I couldn't believe that the driver would desert his mates like that. But I was more interested in the next few in the convoy. The third one blew out a front tire with another huge bang, and so much more white smoke poured out that it became hard to see anything. But I saw enough to satisfy me. As this truck followed the same route as the first, it slewed wildly across the road and slammed heavily and hard into the back of the other one. The fourth one blew a rear tire and did a 360, ending up 50 meters away and in the middle of the road. The fifth one stopped so hard that it sat there shuddering for a moment before the one behind it slammed into its rear. I heard a couple of more crashes back in the cutting, but it was now impossible to tell what was happening. There was so much smoke, and the noise was like the end of the world. I saw a flaming torch fly through the air towards the fifth truck, and realized Lee had gone into action. I needed that to spur me back into life. I lit my first cocktail, waited a second, and then threw it in the same direction as Lee's, then followed fast with my second one. The others had joined in. For a minute the air was full of hot shooting stars. I could see plenty of flame through the smoke, so something was burning, but there were no explosions. A gun opened up, an automatic weapon of some kind, firing wildly at first through the trees above us, but gradually lowering its aim until it was just above our heads. We all got out fast, crouching low and sneaking through the tearing, wild, brambly scrub. Homer was just ahead of me. I realized he was still carrying his Molotov cocktails. He hadn't thrown them. I called out, "Drop the bottles, Homer!" Which he did, and for a moment I thought I'd caused a disaster, because at the exact moment the bottles hit the ground, there was an explosion so vast that the ground heaved under my feet. It took me a second to realize that the explosion was behind us and hadn't come from Homer's bottles at all. Then a shock wave hit me, almost knocking me over, followed by a blast of heat, a dry, airless heat. It felt like someone had opened the door of a steel furnace. I steadied myself, got my balance again, and started to run. The others, the ones I could see, were doing the same. I heard trees screeching as they split and fell behind me. We sure as hell weren't going to win any conservation awards. I ran on. I was too frightened, though. I knew that they could never and would never follow us through the bush. This was our natural environment. I felt as much as home here as the possums and wombats and galahs. Let no stranger intrude here, no invader trespass. This was ours, and this we would defend.